with so much gender-based violence and femicide going on. And we can talk about the numbers about GBV and femicide until we're blue in the face. The real struggle is in the rooting out of this scourge. This year, government has called on all of us to reflect during the 16 days of activism under the theme, accelerating actions to end gender-based violence and femicide, leaving no one behind. But how far have we come in tackling what many are now calling a pandemic? And what can each of us do to play a part in leaving no one behind? Well, let's put those questions to Dr. Nwabisa Shai, a specialist scientist at the Gender and Health Research Unit of the South African Medical Research Council. Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you very much, Doc, for joining us. Dan here. Here it's today on ENCA. Yeah, we find ourselves yet again, 16 days of activism is underway, and we are talking about the scourge, which is unabated. It continues unabated. The numbers, as you and I know, continue to be shocking. But are we making the right strides? I mean, from what you are picking up as the Medical Research Council?
In terms of the work that is currently happening and taking place in different sectors, there is some work that is being done, and I would say that there is at least some improvement, especially around integrated policy, with the National Strategic Plan on gender-based violence and femicide, for instance, being one of the guiding tools that all organizations are encouraged to emulate and follow in how they develop and strengthen their gender-based violence policies. We've seen and heard that, for example, Department of Higher Education and Training has their universities also doing some work to strengthen their GBV policies in alignment with the frameworks that come out of the NSP. There's the Gender-Based Violence Response Fund that is also supporting community-based organizations to deliver evidence-based and evidence-informed programs and in kind of a way that is sustainable. And we have been calling for funding of such programs in the country before.
Yeah, and I guess resources like funding are very critical, especially if we want to accelerate the actions to end gender-based violence. How can we achieve this, in your view, the acceleration of the efforts?
Well, we need unwavering effort then on the side of government to ensure that the integration of the gender-based violence and femicide prevention and response work is strengthened. The Treasury needs to be clear about committing to funding violence prevention, and some of that work has been happening through some of what we see in terms of the community-based organizations supported through DSD, for instance, Department of Social Development, I mean. And we also do need to ensure that there is sustained funding that is provided to continue the work of implementing community-driven programs that are based on evidence, because we need the work that is being done by community organizations to continue, because that work is in touch with our lived experiences of gender-based violence and also our ideas around the gender and social norms that make it even more possible for this kind of violence to continue. And so continuing to fund and rolling out that work at scale is really needed, and actually it is not happening as it should have been. And there's also another important thing, which is prioritizing mental health programs to ensure that we are responding to the effects of gender-based violence that are happening not only to the people who are victimized, but also those that are affected in the ecosystem around the violence when it's taking place.
Yeah. What's the picture of GBV and femicide in our country today? What are you seeing when you look at the holistic picture from the Research Council?
Well, recent studies from femicide have shown that we have high levels of femicide in the country, though we are seeing that through some of the efforts that we actually shared findings last year around the tide turning only a little bit because of some of the policy-driven effort that is taking place in the country. But still, South Africa has about 1 times 5 the global rate of femicide across the world. And so we have that problem, and it's a serious issue. At the same time, we also know that we have women who are experiencing the highest burden of gender-based violence experiences, in particular intimate partner femicide, where a person is abused by their partner. But we are waiting for findings from a national prevalence survey that is being done, which is the work that was called it came out of the NSP, the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. So that one is going to provide us with more information that will tell us across even including those women who are in part of the marginalized groups, like women with disabilities and the LGBTQI, including those gender non-conforming or gender non-binary persons about whom we know very little in terms of the extent of gender-based violence.
Yeah, so, yeah. I see you sitting at the head of a Gender and Health Research Unit at the Research Council. The intersection with abuse, violence, gender-based violence, with health issues. You've mentioned already one of them, mental health. Are there other health challenges arising out of GBV?
Well, the work that we have done in the MRC, I think even from its inception, was around highlighting the sexual and reproductive health related issues that are involved in the scope of gender-based violence. So there are physical injuries that feature with the Department of Health, for instance, when women are seeking help, whether it is going to a clinic or they are going to the hospital for serious injuries, and often it's difficult to quantify, but there is a study but it's a kind of a dated study from 2016 that showed us that the country has a serious burden in billions around the extent to which it's costing the fiscus to respond to gender-based violence.
Okay, in your opinion, finally, Doc, how can everyone play a role in ending this scourge, this pandemic in our country? Yesterday, I took part in day one of the African Union's third men's conference on masculinity in leadership in ending violence against women and girls on our continent. And one of the aspects that's coming out is that we men have to take responsibility. There needs to be a mindset transformation from our side as men as well. And we need to take boys along. In your view, what each of us can do to stop GBV and end femicide?
Just to maybe articulate a little bit of what you could concentrate on within the men's groups is to really be firm and articulate how you are uplifting women in all spheres of society, how that is being done in the workplace, and ensuring, for instance, that your bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, and GBV policies are strengthened, and that there's principled approaches that are helping to respond to the sexual harassment that is often left unattended to in the workplace. And you find that these kind of cases fester, and some of them escalate into serious GBV physical violence that takes place, including rape of colleagues in the workplace, as an example. But another thing is that it's about holding men who are abusive accountable, not blaming the victim, and adopting nonviolent approaches to conflict, which is why it's important that we implement those evidence-based programs, because the work that we have done even here at the MRC is to actually provide ways in which we can take programs to the community, talk to people at their level about issues that they understand, but helping them to build the skills that will encourage healthier and harmonious relationships. And we've seen evidence showing that these kinds of programs actually do work in order to reduce the perpetration of intimate partner violence. And just on one last point is that it is important for us to also, in our effort to uplift women, we need to also consider women as important. Our attitude towards women, the attitude that undermines women, looks at women as being indecisive, women as being, unreliable. We need to stop those kinds of ideas, because those kinds of ideas are the ones that are perpetrating this idea that women should never be taken seriously, and that women are the ones that call the violence upon themselves. And that isn't the case. It is gender, power, inequalities, the fact that men are put on a pedestal and should not be challenged by women, and women do challenge men. Sometimes even without challenging men, women find themselves victimized by men. And so those kinds of ideas need to change, and there must be demonstration by those men's groups as a start to show that you're really committed to uplifting women, and uplifting women by ensuring also that there's sustained employment for women, so that women can also be independent. And another thing I just want to add quickly, Aden, is that it's important for us also provide women with the ability, the skills, the resources to be able to leave abusive relationships. Often we ask ourselves, why are women not leaving abusive relationships? It is because they don't have the psychosocial support, they don't have an understanding of this violence could escalate into a femicide where they are killed by that partner, and often they don't have the skills to free themselves and be able to also sustain their livelihoods and their children. Often we find men do not even want to support these children. And so even legislation that comes in to say that we are going to strengthen the position of women so that women can escape abusive relationships, those issues are important, and I think would be a good start for all of us.
Yeah, I wish we could explore some more, but we've run out of time now. But Dr. Nwabisa Shai, thank you very much for your insights and talking to us. Of course, it is 16 days of activism against gender-based violence in the world, and she is the specialist scientist at the Gender and Health Unit, Research Unit of the South African Medical Research Council.